A big thing that sports people love to do is compare. How good is this player compared to another player? What about his era compared to that of 10 or 20 years ago? Comparing teams is a fun way to look at things, but it usually requires context. So let's ignore that and look at some numbers. I made this spreadsheet. It contains about 70 years worth of teams, 30,000 data cells, and one very saddening conclusion. Let's get started. We're going to look at teams by points per game. While it may not be the ideal stat to rank teams, you can't win without points, and offense is usually much more entertaining than defense. Here are those teams sorted from most to least points per game. We'll talk about the top 10 later, but number 1 is, without a doubt, one of the strangest teams I've ever seen. The 1950 LA Rams are the only team in the top 10 before 1998, and one of the only 2 teams in the top 20 before 1960, the only other being those same Rams in 1951. Old teams don't usually have the stats to measure up with current teams. The 12-game schedule left no margin for error. But even then, their numbers just don't make sense. Let's start by looking at running the ball. Here's the easiest way I can show rushing productivity. In this graph, we have rushing touchdowns alongside rushing yards per game. If you're getting a bunch of yards but not really scoring the ball, it usually means you're leaning mostly on rushing for your offense, but also that you're inefficient. You can get the conclusion there. The weird thing about the Rams is they were insanely efficient, but they barely ran the ball. They scored a lot, but had a remarkable lack of yards per touchdown. 28 touchdowns in 12 games is already insane enough, but they did it in just over 400 attempts. That's an inconceivable average of a touchdown every 14.5 rushing plays. No one is even close to that. With that lack of volume to their rushing offense, there's only one other way to move the ball: passing. Now, before we look at the next graph any closer, I have to talk about something first. Why would I not incorporate fumbles for rushing? Well, let me explain. I looked at fumbles lost numbers for the past 10 years. Looking at that time period, interceptions have happened about 2.7% of all passing attempts, with fumbles coming in at only the slightly smaller 2.3% of all rushing plays. Those numbers aren't what they seem, though. Fumbles can happen off of caught passes as well, and according to Brian Burke for Advanced Football Analytics, about 1% of those pass plays are fumbles. So if we subtract out those pass fumbles, we get to the conclusion that under 1% of rush plays result in a fumble, as compared to the 2.7% of all passing plays that result in interceptions. Moving on, here's a touchdown to interception ratio in comparison to touchdowns thrown per game. Why the focus on yards in rushing and on touchdowns in passing? Well, quite simply, the points had to come from somewhere, and there's still 270 points unaccounted for. Back to the graph. Ignoring the under-discussed 2016 Patriots, while the Rams were moving the ball, they tended to be losing the ball quite a bit as well. How the hell could they manage to keep pace like this? In general, their 426 total offensive yards per game is good, but certainly not elite. Okay, here we go. I'm sure there's something special about the 1950 Rams. Here's a graph showing yards per attempt, rushing and passing. The dark blue line shows the historical average, but if you're above average, congratulations, I'm very proud of you. But we're looking for the elite here. The thinner blue line shows one standard deviation up from the average on both axes. That top corner, those are our baseline for elite. Now, there will be some outliers that I can certainly add for the conversation, but that needs to be saved for another time. For now, the Rams fall below our line on rushing and just above our line on passing. Let's try to put this in context one last time. Drives started being recorded in 1994, so we have to do a little bit of math. When a team kicks off to another team at the start of a new drive, the overwhelming most likely outcome is a touchback. Until just a few years ago, that meant the ball was placed at the 20-yard line. So that means in order to score a touchdown, teams have to travel about 80 yards. So let's see how many points per 80 yards team would score. I'm not going to keep throwing graphs at you, but the easiest way to look at this is that a bad team scores about 3 points, or a field goal per 80 yards, while good teams score just under 7 points per 80 yards, or 1 touchdown. So you have to imagine my surprise when the Rams turned out a 7.11 points per 80 yards. Keep in mind, the 2-point conversion wasn't introduced until 1994 in the NFL, so how the hell did the Rams score more than 1 touchdown a drive? punt and kick return yards were accounted for in total yards, so it's not that. Oh, yeah, that would do it. 46 turnovers forced in the regular season and another 7 added in the playoffs. Their starting position was routinely much further up the field than normal. The 1950 Rams were an amazing offense. They were an above-average offense carried by an incredible defense. The Rams were a sham. Okay, well, that's not very fun, so let's look at number 2 on the points per game rankings. The 2013 Broncos fit the mold of a record-breaking offense significantly better. Peyton Manning threw for 55 touchdowns, which is still the NFL single-season record. To add to that, they also had 7,317 total yards, which is the all-time second best. And of all those 7,317 yards, 5,444 came through the air, another NFL record. Adding on even more, they never scored less than 20 points in any of their games and only scored less than 33 times. They were dominant until they only put up 8 points in the Super Bowl and got blown out by 35. At third in the points per game rankings, we have the 2007 Patriots. Randy Moss, Tom Brady, Wes Welker, Bill Belichick, 16-0 regular season. Most receiving touchdowns by one player in NFL history, and a shoo-in for the championship. Until they ran into this guy. In fact, you have to go all the way back until the 12th best points per game offense in the Rams team that came 49 years after our focus. They're the only team in the top 15 to win the championship. So what does that mean? No matter how incredible those offenses were, something always went wrong. Be it new styles of defenses invented for only one matchup, bad matchups in general, or just sheer bad luck. This happened twice in 5 years, by the way. It just didn't work out. Now, I could say that defense wins championships, but that's too easy. What I take from this is that the most fun option always fails in the NFL. And in those situations, there's only one real conclusion. We blame Roger Goodell.